Chair Delegate Phil Klein can call the meeting to order.
All right, very well. Thank you, Tessa. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Wendy is not able to meet with us today. She's not feeling well, so I've been asked to step in and chair the meeting. I would like to call the November 16th, 2021 meeting of the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee to order. And we will have Tessa, our recording secretary, conduct a roll call.
All right. Annika Bankston. I see that you're here. Annika, could you unmute yourself and provide a verbal acknowledgement of your presence? Or if you're having technical difficulties, I will also come back to you at the end of roll call. Jeff Berg.
Jeff Berg, present.
Thank you, Jeff. Sandeep Burman. Sandeep Burman. Mark DeLayden. Mark DeLayden. Jack Gleason.
Present.
Thank you, Jack. Valerie Neppel.
Present.
Thank you, Valerie. Mike Huang.
Here.
Thank you, Mike. Chair Delegate Phil Klein.
Present.
Thank you, Phil. Brad Larson.
Here.
Thank you, Brad. Susan Morris. Susan Morris. Catherine Nuschler.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, Catherine. Michael Robinson. Michael Robinson. I do believe that Patrick Shea had declined today. So we'll move on to Jamie Sherbin.
Present.
Thank you, Jamie. And I also believe that committee member Lisa Volbrecht had declined. So we will move on to Kevin Watson. Kevin Watson. Tanya West Hafner. Tanya West Hafner. And I did want to go back and ensure that Annika Bankston was able to affirm her attendance. I see that you're trying to speak, Annika, but I don't hear you. I will mark that you are here as I see your microphone is highlighted in green. And with that, we do have a quorum, Chair Delegate Phil Klein.
Right, very well. Thank you very much, Tessa. With that, we will be reading the executive order statement that we need to read every meeting. COVID-19 has caused us to alter our meeting procedures, and the Met Council Chair has determined that it is not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings due to the pandemic. The Metropolitan Council and its committees and advisory committees will conduct meetings in accordance with Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, and members will participate by telephone and other electronic means. Given that it is not feasible for the public to attend these meetings in person, the council will permit pre-registered members of the public to comment during the public invitation portion of this virtual meeting. The public is encouraged to monitor this meeting remotely via our website and YouTube. The public may submit comments to public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and we will respond promptly. With that, we'd like to move on to the approval of the agenda. First action is to approve the agenda. We will do this by consensus. If anyone has any concerns or wants to change the agenda, please feel free to speak up now or raise your hand. If no amendments are requested, we'll consider the agenda approved. Is there any changes or any recommendations to the agenda?
I do not see any hands raised in the chat for amendment or comment.
Very well, then we will assume we will move on as the agenda has been approved. Next, we move on to the approval of the minutes from the September 21st, 2021 minutes from that meeting. If anyone has any concerns or wants to revise anything in the minutes, please feel free to speak up now and raise your hand. Or if no amendments are requested, we'll consider the minutes approved. Are there any changes at this time?
Again, I do not see any hands raised in the chat from any of our committee members.
Okay, all right, very well. We will approve the minutes from the September 21st meeting of 2021. Next is our main purpose today on the meeting is to exchange information and perspectives around infrastructure in the Twin Cities metro area. Like our last meeting, this information will be used to develop recommendations and supporting information for Mossack's report to the Met Council and to the Minnesota Legislature in 2022. Emily Steinweg will lead a presentation of a current project with Rob Isabel, a CDM Smith, related to today's topic. Then we will invite you, Mossack committee members, to share your local perspectives. After that, we'll do a group exercise. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the meeting, please don't use the chat because it's not accessible to people attending by phone. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand and Tessa the recording secretary, will help me acknowledge you. It is also to make it a point throughout this meeting to call, I'll also make it a point throughout this meeting to call on you to share your ideas and questions. We want to make space for everyone to speak. If you don't have anything to share, feel free to pass. Our first item today is an information item, recommendations and local perspectives regarding infrastructure. Emily Steinweg will kick it off. Emily?
All right, thank you very much. Greg, can you please pull up the PowerPoint? Thank you. So welcome again, everyone, to our fourth and final topical Mossack meeting on the topic of infrastructure. Next slide. So again, before we start, I'd like to call out these resources that have been shared by committee members related to our topic today. They fall into the topics listed above and can be found in the draft recommendations document sent prior to today's meeting. Next slide. Today, you are being asked to share your recommendations as a committee around the topic of drinking water supply infrastructure. Your perspectives will be used to draft content in the 2022 report to the Metropolitan Council and Minnesota Legislature. Your perspectives will guide the Council's water supply planning activities and will shape the preparation of the Council's regional development framework. So again, like other meetings, we will be taking the same approach. We'll start with an introduction of the draft recommendations that describe the problem and challenge, our high-level goal, and some recommendations for actions to achieve that goal. And again, this draft is based on past committee and water supply stakeholder conversations, as well as individual interviews held with MAWSAC and TAC members. So before we dive into the discussion on those recommendations, you'll hear some updates about a current Met Council and TAC guided project related to infrastructure, and hear from your MAWSAC colleagues about their experiences and thoughts on infrastructure including consideration of the newly passed 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So then we'll move on to a group exercise in Mural to revise the draft problem statements and recommended actions. And also it will be a chance for you to share your thoughts on anything that we may have missed. And then wrap up with next steps. Next slide, please. So again, the information you share today shapes the thinking and the work at Metropolitan Council and its various areas of impacts, and how it impacts decision makers like the legislature and state agencies. Next slide. So today's topic is on water supply infrastructure. So again, this draft recommendations document was developed by staff and considers past discussions and interviews, as well as internal MCES conversations. And this problem statement and goal was reviewed and revised by TAC at their last meeting. So this is a bit wordy, and I will give you a few moments to review the problem and goal. And next slide, please. So some examples of what may be discussed today include the need and importance of educating and understanding views on the value of water and water infrastructure, the status of emergency water supplies across the region, considerations of life cycles of water supply infrastructure planning and land use planning, and increased support for climate resilient infrastructure. So this slide is just to introduce these draft recommendations, which we'll be discussing in more detail during the mural exercise. Next slide, please. So last month, TAC discussed the same topic, and this slide shares some of their highlights. And I'll give you another moment to skim these. And next slide, please. So as you may have picked up, we do have quite a bit we can discuss today. And this slide, I just have some more reasons to look at the sustainability of infrastructure and how the region will develop and change. So this slide shares updated forecast information that was presented to the Metropolitan Council this past summer, assembled by the Research and Data Department. So the population in the Twin Cities metro area is expected to reach 4 million people in 2050, which is an increase of 1 million from today with no signs of slowing. If we use a conservative estimation of water use of 100 gallons per person per day, the region might need to supply an additional 10 million gallons per day. So to do that, we need an adequate, plentiful water source, sufficient treatment facilities, and distribution systems. So keep these numbers in mind as we continue today. Our water needs are increasing, meaning we really need to focus on having an adequate and reliable distribution system. Next slide, please. And also important to acknowledge, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was just passed, which is an important influence on today's conversation. So the funding the state will receive that will be impactful to water infrastructure is direct funding to improve water infrastructure, funding to prepare for the impacts of climate change, and funding to protect against cyber attacks. So these links will be available after this meeting, so you can click and get some more information if you haven't already seen what Minnesota will be receiving. And then before we open up for our group conversation, I'd like to invite Rob Isabel with CDM Smith to share a current infrastructure-related project that we are working on here at the Council. So you can go to the next slide, Greg, and Rob, take it away when you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Emily, and good afternoon, everyone. As Emily said, my name is Rob Isabel, and I am a project manager and drinking water engineer here with CDM Smith. And I'm excited to be here with you today to talk about and share an overview of a project that we're working on with Met Council related to drinking water security and resiliency in the Twin Cities metro area. Next slide, please. So this project came about by questions raised from the Technical Advisory Committee about water supply and security resiliency here in the Twin Cities metro area. Some of the questions that were raised over the past few years included, what sort of collaboration and partnership do we have for safe interconnections amongst Twin Cities metro water suppliers? What sort of backup water supplies are available in the event that somebody's primary supply was deemed to be unusable due to either water quality or water quantity concerns? Also, there's been questions about what sort of interconnections are out there and the possible effects on the amount and quality of water that might be available to neighboring communities in the event of an emergency. And then if there was an emergency, what sort of interconnection studies and what sort of interconnection emergency agreements are available? Next slide, please. So the last time that something similar was investigated by Met Council was way back in 2007. And at that point in time, it only looked at the physical interconnections. And the map that you see here on this slide was part of the output from that work. And the analysis, it was tabulated from local water supply plans and identified where physical interconnections existed and kind of which ways the flows went. So looking at the map, you can see there in the orange, that's communities that do not have any interconnections or ability to receive water from adjacent communities. Then you can see kind of the first tier suburbs in the green around where there is a fair number of interconnections available. And then lastly, in the blue, back in 2007, these were the areas that did not have a municipal water supply and was all served by private wells. And as you can imagine, things have probably changed quite a bit over the last 14 years. Next slide, please. So Met Council felt that the time had come to update that analysis and look for updated information about the status of emergency water supplies. And so the goal of this project was to really develop resources that were going to assist public water suppliers in making sound decisions regarding their growth, their infrastructure planning, how they would mitigate water shortages, with really an emphasis on the security and resiliency of the system to meet customer demands. And the timing of this was pretty good as well, considering that everyone has just recently submitted their resiliency risk and resiliency assessments, or they completed their risk and resiliency assessments, I should say, over the past few years. Next slide. So our hope on this project is to really better understand the public water supplier's experiences, your concerns, the struggles, and the issues that you have in providing water now and into the future. And if there are gaps in ensuring a safe water supply, Met Council is really interested to understand how it can utilize its resources to help fill those gaps. And like in the past on other projects, the possible ways Met Council could utilize its resources would be through technical support or research, funding suggestions, directions, again, any sort of potential tools or programs, advocacy at the state legislature level, and to assistance in kind of pulling communities together in collaboration. Next slide. So the phase one of this project is pretty straightforward. We're going to begin, we've completed the data gathering phase where we analyze local water supply plans and comprehensive plans and resources on security and resiliency of water supplies from organizations like EPA and AWWA. The next, we held 2 small work group sessions where we wanted to hear directly from public water suppliers, and the topics of those conversations included their water supply as it related to the quantity, quality, and interconnections, treatment concerns with regards to aging infrastructure and contamination and the ability to meet water quality regulations. We also talked about the distribution system status and if any concerns about aging infrastructure, lead service lines, and also too what sort of interconnects they might have with their neighbors. We talked about physical and cyber security and backup power. We also dove into a little bit of climate resiliency to, with our climate changing and climate change upon us, what sort of concerns utilities might have as it relates to flooding or potential water supply shortages due to drought. We talked about the public perception of water. And lastly, we talked about staffing resiliency and what sort of issues utilities might be having right now with retirements and some of the hiring challenges that we're just having in our economy here in general. And we asked how, all these things considered, how can Met Council utilize its resources to help? So we completed those small work group sessions, and we're now kind of jumping into our data analysis report and summary outreach phase. Next slide, please. So there was 2 work groups that we held, and we had 7 utilities that participated: Minneapolis, St. Paul, Roseville, Fridley, Minnetonka, Burnsview, and Mount. And they participated in workshops on October, I think it was actually 6th and 13th. And we also had an additional input provided by the Minnesota Department of Health. They had heard that we were doing the study and decided they wanted to provide some feedback as well. So they were provided to Emily and I some written responses to our questions based upon their observations of those questions from a kind of a statewide perspective. And we'll talk more about the results, I think, in future workshops. But one very common concern that was raised by almost everybody that we spoke with was staffing resiliency. With the economy the way it is right now with the baby boomer generation, I guess it's not 100% surprising, but we did hear that utilities right now are really struggling to find and keep trained water operators or trained public works employees. And 2, there's challenges in getting high school graduates to think about careers in public works or think about a career as a water operator. And with our current economy the way it is today and just the hiring challenges across almost any industry, it seems like it's making it even more challenging. So that's something that we're excited to perhaps dive into a little bit more here in some of the next phases of the project. So we were excited here today. We're happy to kind of share kind of the status of this project. We're thankful to all the TAC members who helped shape this project, and a few of you here on the call helped participate and provide input on this project. We do greatly appreciate it. And I will throw out a plug here as well, in that if your utility is interested in participating, we do have time to accept some additional feedback, and we'd be happy to receive it. So Emily, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and thanks for doing that plug, because I was just going to do the same. So yes, please let us know if you would like to participate. We really appreciate the feedback. Greg, can you please go to the next slide? So today we are doing our local experiences a little bit differently today. We did this at TAC and had a great discussion, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. So we would like to hear from you, Mossack members, what concerns you have regarding infrastructure. What questions have you heard from your communities? Anything that you have heard. So we'd like this to be a place to for you to hear from each other about challenges, concerns, and thoughts on the status of water supply infrastructure. So again, this is an open discussion. You can either jump in or raise your hands, and we will moderate that to allow everyone to speak as they wish. So some questions I have on the slide, which you can talk about, or just anything that comes to mind. Could be what infrastructure problems or challenges and what impacts are most concerning. What current and future infrastructure challenges are you or your utility thinking about? What has your utility or in your area done or hope to do to increase consumer confidence? Have you had any experience with your water supplier and water supply planning and land use development and planning? And then the last question we always like to ask is, how could the council and or organizations represented both on TAC and MOSSAC help? So I'd like to open it up for discussion. So if anyone would like to jump in or raise their hand, we have probably until 1:45 to discuss, so about 20 minutes.
I do not see any raised hands thus far, Emily.
Emily, if I may, Phil Klein.
Mm-hmm.
Emily, one of the things that we've talked about here as a city of Hugo is the ability to make interconnections between the different communities, around us, surrounding communities. And one of the things that we found that is, one, some of the water towers are at different heights. That's part of an issue because it's related to water pressure. The other thing is the sizes of the pipes where you make the interconnections themselves. How do we make that happen? And then probably thirdly is, some communities put chemicals in their water supply to make it safer, and others don't. I think those are some we have.
I'll jump in here with a question.
Yep.
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Go ahead. Kevin, go ahead. That's okay. Can't hear me. Anyway. Emily, that's what I had. We can't hear you, Emily.
I'm back. Yeah, so then the last point you wanted to share was the issue with matching the treatment methodologies and the chemicals.
Yes, that and the height and the water pressures that different cities are working with, and then also the pipe sizes that make these connections doable.
And we do have a hand raised from Mr. Larson.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the issues that's unique to Savage, but I would venture to guess that there's other communities out there that have the similar issue, is that we have the fen in Savage, and because of the fen, we can't use the aquifers that are most readily available to us. We have to drill deeper, which is cost prohibitive to us. We partnered with Burnsville because of that, but that costs money too, because Burnsville has a surface water treatment plant that they have to use and maintain. We provide funds to help that because we're using quite a bit of their water. At some point, we will need to, we can't just rely on Burnsville. We have to have the infrastructure in place to provide water to all of our residents. We have that right now, but we're reaching the capacity, and we'll have to do something in the next couple of years so that we have backup to whenever Burnsville goes down, or if there is an issue at Burnsville, so we can provide our own water. And with the restrictions put in place by DNR, that's really difficult for us to do right now.
Has the DNR given any advice or direction for how to maintain your self-sufficiency in the next couple of years with their limitations?
Well, we've done water studies, so we know that we will have to add, sometime in the future, we'll have to add something. And the issue is that we'll have to drill another well, and we're limited to the wells that we can access because of the Savage fen. When we partnered with Burnsville, what we've heard is that the water table around the fen did start to come back up, and that helps things, which is good. The thorn in our side is that the DNR has identified that as a scientific natural area, so they're not going to do anything with the area. We can't program it. From our perspective, it's being overrun by buckthorn and trees, so whatever made it look like a fen, it doesn't really look like a fen anymore. And then we can't use the most readily available aquifers. We have to spend more money to drill deeper down.
Yeah, tough spot.
I do not see any additional hands raised at the moment.
Emily, if I may, Phil Klein.
Mm-hmm.
Along those lines as well, here in the city of Hugo, we're dealing with the restrictions possibly from the White Bear Lake judgment that was decided upon. And even though we've we've done a lot in our conservation efforts. We've saved well over 40 million gallons, and probably after this year, once we figure out what the total projects have been, we've probably almost doubled that. We're not given any credit for any type of conservation savings, water savings that we've done. And because of that, we may end up being restricted on the amount of water we're able to even use as a city, even though we send 10 times the amount of water that we use from as a city down the river into the Mississippi River. It's a regulatory problem. And I can definitely relate to what's being said.
Yeah, so all that work and the conservation work and environmental protection work isn't being recognized.
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
I do see Tanya's hand raised. Committee Member Tanya West Hafner.
Thank you. I just wanted to add in, I don't remember exactly the questions, but the thing that popped in my head immediately when you started asking the questions was the stuff that I've been hearing from people, which is that Met Council wants everyone to take their water from the Mississippi River. And obviously Brooklyn Park would have to change their whole system because we use aquifers right now and wells and all that. And then potentially having surrounding cities piping through our city just to get to the Mississippi River. And then if you guys had been on it at all this year and how incredibly low it was, you could pretty much walk across it. So it just worries me a little bit when everybody's being encouraged to try to take their water from the same resource. Even though we have, a different type of water system right now. I mean, all of our people complain because the water's hard and stuff because we get it from the aquifers. But at the same time, if we all turned around and took it from the Mississippi River, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. So I don't think that's a long-term solution to anything. I just wanted to add that in here, that's the kind of stuff that I hear from, because obviously we border the Mississippi River and, so, I mean, it'd be easier for us to do it, but we don't even do it. So thank you. That's all I had.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose the drought didn't help, but I'm just curious with, contamination found in aquifers, if that conversation in your community in particular came up again of switching to surface water. I mean, all the sources have their own issues and uncertainties. Annika,
I don't think I've heard anything specifically from our water people about contamination stuff, but I haven't asked them either. So, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where I just feel like it's like everything else. You almost need to have a myriad of different options for people so that it isn't just one source or another that we're all taken from. I guess that was the point I was trying to make. So
it is a shared resource, even though we have boundaries on top. And just jumping off that conversation, Annika, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm curious as to what your perspective is after the drought this summer and conversations about water supply and potential future repeats, I guess, of drought, and if that's a conversation that Minneapolis has had in providing water for the surrounding communities, and then maybe even more.
Working for the group now.
I think I can hear you, but
sorry, I just got a new laptop.
Yeah, the sound settings are always so difficult to figure out.
Better?
It is better. Yep. So if you could just maybe speak up a little louder than normal.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, this year's drought impacted Minneapolis and all of the water utilities that draw even groundwater from the upper Mississippi River Basin. you know, throughout the summer, throughout this year, even though the river got extremely low, we never had any quantity concerns as far as the ability to take water from the river. I believe at the peak draw rate between us and St. Paul, I believe we were taking about, just for relative comparison, about maybe 15% of the river flows were coming to Minneapolis and St. Paul from what was passing through at Highway 610. So obviously, you know, most years we're less than 1% of the total river flow. So it definitely, in aggregate, added up to it. But just with the nature of the hydrogeology of the river, we were never concerned about our intakes going dry or anything like that. So, you know, but again, having to manage our customers' demand to make sure that withdrawal rate stayed reasonable and there was still river, you know, water flowing down river to the downstream users was important. So for us, it was really a demand customer side management to stay within targets. Since some of those targets have been set with the drought planning, you know, back in the early 90s, as you know, some of the background materials for this call talked about, our average use has dropped off considerably. So, you know, back in 1990, when they were planning, our average day was on the order of 70 to 75 MGD. We are down around 50 now. So, and our summer demands are much less peaky. So all the, you know, good work that we've been doing with respect to conservation and water efficiency, that really put us in a good place for not only demand management, but you know, dealing with the river drought. So the long-term sustainability, I definitely hear what Tanya was saying about all eggs in one basket, and know every source has its challenges. And I think just similar to the way that, you know, aquifers, the volume of water available in aquifers and the recharge rate, the river watershed has to be looked at in the same way, the volume of flows and the surface water flows that come into it as well. So you know, with river, it's, and that's certainly going to be a concern moving forward, is periods of drought, periods of excessive rain and flooding. The river is going to become a lot more variable in its flows. But this season, I still think droughts are going to be, while more frequent, are going to be, you know, intermittent still on a regular basis. I think we've heard maybe every 40 years there'll be a big drought. Maybe that comes every 20 now, but I do think, I'm not a geologist, but I think the river will be flowing well past the end of my careers and others and my successors as well. So
we do have the hand raised of committee member Mike Wong.
Thank you very much. So I do want to add into this conversation. I can agree with what committee member Tanya Westhafner raised, which is that, you know, it's, in addition to being a single source, we're not the only users. And it's one thing to measure with like a single community pulling from that water source, but it's an entirely different thing if like every city in the metro is drawing from that same water source. And not to mention the fact that we're not the only users. There's also industrial users, there's agricultural users, and there's also downstream users who rely on the water tables for shipping and cargo, right? So, I mean, it's not that, you know, like the city of Chaska is not going to drain the Mississippi River, right? We're not going to drain the Minnesota River either. But collectively, we can put enough of a dent in that it's going to have measurable downstream impacts. And that's not just a local problem. It's not municipal. It's more of a measurable issue for the entire watershed of the Mississippi itself, because this has impacts for people potentially in Louisiana at the other end of it. So I think it's a little bit probably. I'm trying to be judicious about the words I choose here, but I think it's a little presumptuous to make the assumption that, sure, it's okay to draw from it, everyone should draw from a single source without looking at this as an entire system. Because we're not the entire system, we're just one piece of the entire system. We've seen the similar things happen in like the Black Sea, where, you know, like we're seeing like, you know, there's like lakes, entire lakes and ecosystems are completely devastated because a community would draw from it, another community would draw from agricultural, And next thing you know, it's completely dry and barren now. I mean, there's ships that are abandoned on land because of it. So I think, you know, we need to kind of be really careful about what we do long term. That said, I think it's reasonable to say we need to look at diversifying our sources and making sure that the sources we use are sustainable, and they're also not as variable too, because putting all of our eggs into a single variable basket puts us all at a similar risk for a drought, for example. So, you know, when the drought conditions, everything may be fine now, but okay, let's say that the 100-year, 20-year, or 10-year drought happens. What's the impact to the communities that are in the tail end of that water cycle or that water flow that are getting less water, and the water that's coming downstream is of lower quality too? And that's a very significant challenge. So I think we need to be more deliberate, but not just look at it myopically as just the metro cities or even Minnesota for that matter. It's a much bigger, the bigger picture we need to look at. The other thing which changing topics a little bit from a infrastructure challenge is, and I think other cities may run into this, maybe experiencing this, is that, like for example, part of our community was built over 100, 150 years ago, and we're just finishing off a 10+ year program to rebuild our city streets, which include our water supplies and also storm drains and sewer systems. And we're doing that in our downtown area. Now it took about 10 years for a relatively small town here. But we also have a larger part of our community which was built during the 1970s, which is a pretty significant chunk of our community of like 10, 15,000 people. And that's another group of another area of our community that will have to get rebuilt at some point. And I think one of the things we need to look at is, you know, some of the financial challenges associated with rebuilding and maintaining some of these much older systems, where we're starting to see, like during the winter, we'll see pipes burst, and and not just in homes, but like major arterial pipes that are bursting that basically cause street flooding and cut off water for hundreds, if not thousands, of users. And I think that's something that's becoming more of a problem as these pipes deteriorate and as they get older. We're certainly trying to be as proactive as we can about it, but since these are built in large segments over a relatively short amount of time, now it's replacement of those becomes more challenging because there's not a large sum of money just sitting out there waiting to replace those. Not to mention the inconvenience it would cause for homeowners to say, oh, we're going to rip out all of the water system, their pipes and streets all at once. But just want to call that one out. There's an ongoing infrastructure challenge. I think that we're probably not alone in facing, as a lot of communities are going to be facing it, especially as their communities age and the infrastructure under the streets deteriorates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Just a quick follow-up question on the aging infrastructure. Does your community and council members, do they understand maybe the full extent of the infrastructure challenges, like maybe the scale of what needs future maintenance and rehabilitation, or the overall cost? Like, it's just expensive to do that type of work.
Yeah. So, for example, we're coming to the last couple of years of a downtown infrastructure rebuilding, which includes rebuilding our city streets in our downtown area. And that part it's been 11 years now. I think it'll be probably 2 more years, and we should be finished with it. But that covers a relatively small, community downtown. If you're familiar with Chaska, it's really that downtown Chaska core. And that includes all the residential areas in that community. And, and for us, that was a pretty big undertaking, because that was, assessments to local homeowners and street closures. I mean, so this is like digging up the entire infrastructure. And then in some cases, I mean, this was an opportunity to provide modern improvements for those homeowners too, who basically are sitting on, for example, storm drains that were built out of clay and have since deteriorated. So what was remaining in those storm drains was basically mud holding up the walls of the drains. In some cases, the water was making its own way through like tree roots and other systems because there just wasn't anything else. So, these were systems that were just so old and decrepit that it was effectively, ripping out completely and replacing lock, stock, and barrel. In our Jonathan community, the scope of it's pretty significant because they were built in the 1970s and the late 60s. And, a lot of those are cast iron pipes. Now, those are generally pretty good, but to some degree. Some of them are, reaching near the end of their service life or starting to reach, the criticality of problems caused by just frost heaves and things like that. So we're pretty cognizant of it, but it's one of those things that we know we can't tackle all at once because it's just fiscally there's just no way to do it. And it's unfortunately it's one of those things we have to look at, how to financially balance this with our own funding and also making sure that we're not adversely impacting individual residents or certain neighborhoods too much while we're trying to rebuild or trying to repair these systems. So yeah, we're very cognizant of it, but it is a very significant challenge. I think that we're trying to get ahead of as much as we can, but in some cases, because the system's so large that we have to look at effectively repair as we go. As something breaks, we have to fix it, but knowing that there's going to be plenty more breakages occurring in upcoming years.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. And the headache of having to go to the same residential street for a water main break and then, oh, the street's getting fixed next year or something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Time doesn't always work out like that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those perspectives. Sounds like, the community has gotten at least they have a preview of kind of the extent of this type of work. So this has been great so far, and I'm going to suggest that we continue our conversation in the Mural Board, and we can take a look at what recommendations TAC has prioritized on this topic, as well as continue to share your perspectives. So Lanya, would you like to take it away with introducing the Mural Board again?
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I apologize. I've been having some technical difficulties today, so if I do cut out, my apologies, and Emily will step in, I'm sure, to rescue me. I did just want to walk you through what we're going to do, and then we'll do it. And I think it's going to really build on this conversation and some of the challenges that you all just shared. You should have gotten an email earlier today, thank you, Tessa, that includes a link to the Mural Board. But if you don't use Mural, or you're just watching this meeting, you can follow along on the PowerPoint presentation included with the agenda. Next slide, please. Again, if you're interested in using Mural, there's some links in this presentation that you can click on. Next slide. This is the Mural Board you're going to go to. And again, for those of you who are still learning it or are new to it, once you click on the link Tessa sent you, you'll go to this website and you can move around in a variety of ways. So you can click and drag with your mouse. To zoom in and out, you can use Control+ or Control- if you like that scroll wheel. Or you can open up a outline block on the far left, and if you click on those different sections where it says consider the problem, it'll zoom you to that part of this sort of whiteboard. Or you can just hover over the LR icon at the bottom and choose to follow me, and you'll go wherever I go. And then once we're in there, I'm going to ask you to contribute some ideas. So to do that, if you just double click on any of the existing blank sticky notes, you should be able to edit them, or it might just create a new sticky note and you can write directly in there. If you have any trouble and you prefer to share your ideas verbally, raise your hand. Tessa will notice that and call on you, and I can add your comments for you, and we'll have it recorded with the meeting recording. Next slide. So just to remind you again, we are asking for your input on sort of high-level description of the water supply infrastructure context and challenge for our region, and also input on what a goal would be. And we'll be incorporating this into the draft report to the council and to the legislature. So I will be asking you to take a moment to review this. This is the text that is also in the memo document that's attached to the agenda. So if you want more detail or to look at it in a PDF document, you can do that. And once we're done with that, I'm going to ask you on a scale from 8, you really like it, all the way down to 1, no, 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 how strong your support for this current wording is. And then we'll talk about how to improve it. Next slide. So as you think about water supply infrastructure challenges and how you would describe them, I do want you to share any suggestions you have for how we can strengthen our description. And we'll take some time to look at all the ideas that were shared so you can highlight any that your colleagues said that you want to make sure get amplified. Next slide. I'm also stalling here to make sure you all have time to get into that website. I see several of you are there. We do have some recommended actions, so we'll spend a little bit of time for you to digest them and maybe do some work to prioritize them or highlight them. But we also want to tap your knowledge and experience to add to those recommendations. If there's anything we're missing, we want to collect that. We also want your experience on what might make the biggest impact or have the longest term benefits for the region-wide water supply infrastructure. And then also your thoughts about what might be easiest to implement. Sometimes that low-hanging fruit is what we need, and every little bit helps. Next slide. I do hope we have time at the end to get your thoughts too about how we might step into this work. So if you have examples of actions that we could start now, existing projects that we could build on or use as a model, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about that. If there is a particular organization or person that you think would be a really good leader for work in this area, we want to capture that, and any critical partners, and your general questions or expectations for them. Next slide. I'm going to open it up for discussion. I'm going to try to share my screen so that people watching will be able to see the mural board. I know that this is not ideal, but I appreciate your leaning in. I believe I'm sharing Google Chrome. Can I get a verbal yes or no from you, Emily or Tessa?
Yes,
yep, I
we
can
see your screen.
And I just want to make sure, are you seeing just the web page or are you seeing my entire desktop?
Just the internet browser, and I see the four tabs.
Perfect. Not that you guys can't see what's on my desktop, but nobody needs to be that overwhelmed with that many open applications. All right, so I see many of you are here, and I would like to invite you all to take a minute, I'll put on a timer, to read the problem statement and the goal and think about how strongly you support that. I am gonna get rid of some of the cursors so that you guys watching are not distracted. And have some quiet reading time. A minute always feels so long in these remote meetings. All right, well, I hope that gave everybody a chance to digest, because now I would like to get your input. So based on what you read and your own experiences and what we talked about earlier, how strongly do you support this description? I'm gonna do a voting session, little sticky dots, and you can put your, if you really like it, put your dot on the number 8. If you do not like it at all, put your dot on the number 1. And if you're somewhere in between, choose the appropriate number. I'm going to give each of you 1 dot, and we'll just take a few seconds here to vote. So you all should have a little sticky dot. So it's going to be really tiny. So just if you go click on the 8, the 7, the 6, 5, 4, it should show up, although it's weirdly tiny. See, few people are still voting, so I'm going to give you a little more time. I'm going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See what we've got. All right. So we have one strong support, some agreement with some reservations, middle of the road, and a couple of lower. So 3 disagree with it, willing to go with the majority, and no opinion one way or the other. That would be 4. If you would like, would anybody like to share where your disagreement is? Our goal is to improve this. So it is not perfect by any means.
Lanya, this is Catherine. I'll just jump in. For me, it's that first paragraph and sort of the like unplanned events, like new regulatory limits that don't consider infrastructure costs. I just don't like how it's phrased. It feels, I don't know. This is me being the regulator, right? It feels very punitive about like new regulatory limits, and I think doesn't recognize that there's limitations when setting some of these things that limits are based on to actually considering costs. You know, obviously we want to use our public money the best ways we can to ensure the environment is safe. And I think that also kind of cuts against this, I mean, the idea of public perception and confidence, you know, really connects to those regulatory limits, and is there a sense that they're all being met? So it just feels a little like undermining the importance of those limits when they're needed for a reason to protect human health. Sorry, that was longer than I meant it to be, but hopefully that was helpful.
That was incredibly helpful. I'm trying to capture your notes. If you're in the mural board, go in and change my wording. Does anybody have a question or a follow-up to that?
This is
Annika. Yeah, I had the same sentiment a bit about that. I wouldn't, just the phrasing of it, I wouldn't consider new regulatory limits unplanned. The other, I guess, concern I maybe had was, you know, there's other goal areas that Mossack is working on that specifically talk about contamination and water quality and land use. You know, those are 2 of the other 4 areas. So it seemed they were bringing in maybe some other, I think maybe more focused specifically on the infrastructure component in this particular area might be warranted in the problem statement. Rather, it seemed to try to be a little bit more catch-all maybe than focused. So.
Thank you. Did I hear Jamie's voice?
Yeah, this is Jamie, and I would agree with those previous comments, including especially that last comment about being more focused. My concern as written is the same as my concern that I've expressed at the last 2 meetings, that this is very lengthy and dense to read. It's not very reader-friendly. It took me a lot to digest it, a lot of effort, and I think that's the opposite of what we need for the audience that we are after. I would look for every opportunity to cut this in half or more in terms of number of words and maintain some of the same important topics, but not list them all individually.
Thank you. Is there
We
anybody?
do have committee member Mike Huang's hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my suggestion is kind of similar to those who have spoken earlier, but it's more specific in terms of if we could find like the common groupings of some of these areas, because we're listing out, it's just a laundry list of different things that are issues or concerns in both the first and the second paragraph too. But if we could group them to organized categories of things and maybe either summarize and then break them out so that way that's like such as like technical issues such as like whatever, and then at least group them under like technical issues, regulatory issues, or whatever they are, or whatever meaningful categories make sense. I think that would help and make it digestible, and then use some of these other specific areas as examples of what those items are. Because right now, I agree, it's really dense, and I think it loses a lot of it doesn't lose substance, but it loses a lot of its impact because people are just trying to get it into their heads.
Yeah. Let's continue this conversation. We're kind of moving into, this is the bridge, different things we could do to make your support stronger. What can we change and improve? So I am going to continue to collect comments if anybody wants to share verbally. And I also invite all of you to go in, if those of you in the mural board, and double click on the orange sticky notes, add your own comments. I'll continue to add anything anyone would like to share verbally. Let's take a minute or two to continue to brainstorm here.
Lanya, if I may, is Phil Klein.
Yes.
Lanya, I guess I was the one that voted that it should be adopted as it is, and I understand it is wordy. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think it could be condensed. I think it'd be more helpful if it was condensed. However, it's a starting point, and at least it gets the people who are reading this in an understanding that this is a complicated issue, and it's going to take some real thought and some real ideas on how to get this thing, how we come to handle the water issue overall. And I think that we should start with it, and then from there on maybe make some modifications as we go. And again, those modifications could be to reduce the verbiage that's involved with this, because it is rather lengthy, and I do agree with that side of it. But at least it's a starting point.
Thank you for that. And again, if you are in the mural board, I tried to catch your comments, but feel free to go in and edit and add. Thank you. I'm seeing a couple of additional comments. We need firm examples of some of these areas would provide more substantive grounding on directional intent. A quick attempt at rewording was provided. Thank you very much. That's always helpful. And for those of you who are watching this, I know it's hard to see some of these details. I do always want to make sure that you know that all of these comments will be included in the notes and follow-up from this meeting. So if you look in the minutes, you'll see some of these details. So you won't miss any content. And we are, Emily and I are pulling from this mural board and these comments to draft the Mossack report. So you'll see this influencing that as well. I still see some people adding comments, so I'm going to give a little bit more time here.
I did want to interject. There is a comment in our feed from committee member Jeff Berg just noting that he is signing off, and I wanted to record that since the comments are not available to the public. And we still do have a quorum even with his departure.
Thank you, Tessa. I hear some suggestions to provide some open-ended examples of solutions, provide directional guidance, more succinct goal statement, fill potholes. If only it were that simple. Let me give it, you guys are just sort of deep in thought here. So I'm going to put solid minute on the timer and we'll see where we're at. couple more blank sticky notes if anybody would like to fill them in. See a couple people still writing. For those of you who are done, please take some time, if you're in the mural board, to go in and look at some of the comments that were shared. And I appreciate whoever added that this many comments suggests we need more work on this. This was also a very robust conversation with the TAC last month as well. So yes, I get that impression. I'm going to do a quick little poll. And I'm going to give everybody 3 little dots and just less than a minute to click on any comments that have been shared that you would like to highlight or amplify. So you can use all 3 dots on one comment. So just click on the sticky note to add your dot. Or you can spread your 3 dots out to 3 different comments if you'd like. I think. Although it occurs to me, if you click on something, it might unclick. I apologize. If I messed with you, I apologize. Might work best to spread your dots out. Just give it a few more seconds here. Anybody else? At least one more person is still voting. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. So we'll share these later too, and these are very useful for Emily and me to look at revisions to this. But the highest highlighted comment was, can you start with something simpler or high level? Something like utilities face ongoing challenges to providing affordable, safe, and trusted water supply. These include aging infrastructure, decreased revenue, and more awareness of contamination. Then move on to details with bullets. So thank you. That was incredibly helpful. Continue to add. We're going to leave this mural board open for the rest of the meeting. But I did want to move us on to a little bit more detailed. What we're looking at right now is a matrix with a sticky note of all of the recommended actions that you see in the recommendations memo that was attached to the agenda. So in purple, you see suggestions that are related to financial or funding. Orange are recommended actions more related to outreach and engagement. Light blue is research. Dark blue is regional policy related. The gray and the yellow were added by TAC last month at their meeting. So I invite you to take a minute to read through these recommendations. For those of you following along, if you want the details, it's in that recommendations memo in the agenda. And think about if you would add anything to this list, or you can also move these around. So something that is easy to implement, move up towards the top. Something that you feel is going to be really challenging to implement, move down to the bottom. If it's going to have a smaller or maybe a more short-term impact, move it off to the left. And if you think it's going to have a bigger or more long-term impact, shift it over to the right. And for those of you who are not in the mural board, but do have a recommendation for some action that should be taken related to water supply infrastructure, you can also share by voice as well. There's something that we really cannot miss. We'll wrap up before too long. I see a couple new things are being added, and I'll be curious to get you to get your experience if it's one person moving these all around or if there's a little tug of war going on or not. Looks like it's slowing down. I'm gonna give you like 20 more seconds. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey, thank you all for that. There was a lot of reorganization going on here. I would love to hear somebody, if you'd like to share kind of any takeaways for you. Did anyone move something and have it shifted by somebody else? Crickets. Still thinking.
Committee member Mike Wong has his hand raised.
Excellent.
Yeah, I didn't really notice like, some of the things I moved like shifting around too much, but I definitely noticed that there is things that were probably like broader, like regional or at the state level were things that tended to be on the harder to implement side. At least certainly that would be my assumption because it's like, more stakeholders, probably more legislation needed. Things that involve funding would typically be harder to implement. The quick and easy wins tended to be in the education side that tended to flow to the upper right corner from what I noticed. Because, those are things, we could put materials together, we would have people, it doesn't cost a lot of money, right? And local actions may be easier depending upon community than, more broader regional activities.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm looking at the data, like looking for your patterns. No, that's a really good point. Anyone else?
I see no other hands raised.
Okay. Can't spell priority. Really quickly, if you're interested, I'm just going to give everybody again 3 votes, and if there's any one of those actions that you would like to highlight, kind of would be a priority for you, I invite you all to put a little sticky dot on your preferences. Watching the number of people voting up here at the top to get a sense of where we're at. Give it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we have 3 people highlighting investigate equitable water rate structures. 4 votes. 3 people on investing in water supply sustainability and resiliency of systems. The third one would be support for programs to fund the cost of infrastructure asset renewal, and a wide variety of votes on some others. So that's, again, very helpful. We will be summarizing this information in the meeting minutes, so you'll be getting all of these details. Thank you. So as we think about some of those actions and some of the different challenges, I just wanted to create some space to get your thoughts or suggestions about an action that you think would be good and we should be starting now or soon. Or if there's an example or there's an example of an existing effort that we could be using as a model or expanding on. So feel free to share this by voice or go in and edit away at all of the sticky notes. I mean, we have a lot of really great work being done across the region, and so I know that we can be enhancing and amplifying that.
I did want to interject to let you know that we did have 2 other members that had to leave, whether due to technical difficulties or commitment issues. So we have dropped down to 8 voting members, which is below quorum, but we do not have any votes that are necessary for the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you, Tessa. And those of you who remain now get to drive the direction. I hear creating and sharing educational materials related to water sources. It's like leveraging some of our nonprofit and professional organizations like AWWA, NACWA. Developing a new framework for household affordability and financial capability assessment in the water sector, which I have not looked at. Thank you for that recommendation. And alternatively, for those of you who don't have a specific project, if you want to think about who might be some good leaders or some critical partners to make sure we're engaging with early and deeply on any infrastructure related work, please feel free to share that as well. Seeing a lot of comments related to education and outreach, city water departments, Minnesota Rural Water Association, counties. There's some really good mural use here, but I also do invite any members to share by voice if you would prefer. I can add your comments. Seems to be slowing down a bit, so I'll give it just a few more seconds. So I see somebody type in, wait. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Is there anything before we leave the mural board and go on to the next agenda item? Is there anything, any takeaways anyone would like to share? Anything to call attention to?
This is Jamie Sherban. Just kind of a parting thought on this is that the earlier presentation referred to the federal infrastructure bill and something like $680 million coming to Minnesota. And we really haven't talked at all about that. You know, maybe that's the gateway to making some of these things happen. And as we're presenting to legislators, I think they often get wish lists with no money. it may be better to lead with there's money coming and here's some recommendations for using it.
Any responses to that?
I don't exactly have a response, but I'm literally just seeing that EPA released something called a funding integration tool for source water. So how you can integrate federal funding sources to support activities, and I don't know if they might get any of that funding in here or not. I'm just like, it literally just popped across my desk. I'm looking at it right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, I put a couple things on the board just with the understanding that most of those federal monies are going to be administered through the Drinking Water Revolving Fund programs and Clean Water Revolving Fund programs for the state. So MDH and MPCA staff involved with that are going to get real busy real quick. And I think, you know, that was my suggestion too, is just understanding their project prioritization rating and just the intention of how those funds are gonna flow to the state and out to community water suppliers. And my understanding is those federal monies, I think 49% need to be grants. So the eligibility criteria for those grants, and again, I don't know, you know, what the federal requirements will be versus what state discretion is in their own distribution of those funds. So a lot of work with a lot of money coming in. And I think maybe our last call or 2 calls ago too is there enough contractors and consultants out there to spend all the money that we're getting? Or we're all going to be competing against each other for the resources to do the projects we want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'd like to, I'm kind of cutting into a little bit of time here, but we're segue into the conversation about this report to the legislature and to the council, and it's a report from MAWSAC, which means it's a report representing the state water agencies. So to be a useful document, is there, you know, a certain kind of content that would be helpful coming from a water advisory committee in early 2022 that could help set the stage for any of that thinking or those conversations? I mean, does that make any sense? I don't want a document that's just going to sit on a shelf, right? The idea is that it seeds some thinking as plans are developed, as policies are updated, as legislative language is being considered. So if there is something we'd like to highlight, particular action, particular question, I think now is a good time.
For transparency's sake, committee member Catherine Nuschler did post the article in the chat for the EPA document, which I can include in our meeting minutes.
Thank you. I appreciate your sharing that. I see a couple more comments being added here. This will be open throughout the meeting and into this afternoon. So if you do have just a thought you'd like to finish, please feel free and take the time for that. This has been incredibly helpful. I really appreciate this conversation and the thinking that you've shared. But I do want to keep us on time. And so unless there's any last minute addition, I'll change to the next agenda item. Hearing nothing?
No hands are raised.
All right. In that case, I will ask Greg to bring up the drafting MOSSAC report presentation. All right. So this is all these conversations are turning into something. And one of those things is a MAWSAC report. Next slide. Again, just to recap, this is to Met Council and the Minnesota Legislature primarily, with the goal of providing a set of recommendations and some supporting information around some of the high priority water supply topics that you as a committee identified and have been tackling over the past year. Hopefully, this will be good information so that policymakers and influencers are better informed to develop and implement policies or other projects or programs, ideally to help achieve multiple benefits and reduce unintended impacts to water supplies. And this is a report required by Minnesota statutes 473-1565, which sort of sets the responsibility of MOSSAC. Next slide. I just wanted to reiterate our proposed milestones are spending the fall, providing input at meetings. And so we have just reached the end of one of those milestones with this last meeting about water supply topics. And going into the winter, we are incorporating all of those comments into a report document guided by some committee volunteers. A special shout out to our delegate chair, Mr. Phil Klein, for volunteering there. If anybody else would like to volunteer to help us work on that content, please let us know. The goal is to have that document final draft ready for approval by MAWSAC and TAC January 18th. We're proposing a joint meeting with MAWSAC and TAC, so if we want to have any conversation, we have both committees there. Hopefully January 25th will be the date we can share that final report with the Metropolitan Council's Environment Committee, presenting it to the full Metropolitan Council early February, and submitting it to the legislature mid-February. So it's a little bit of a rush, but we've got some good staff resources to support this process. Next slide. And so this is kind of where we are midway toward the end of this process. We have, as I said, gotten some TAC and Mossack volunteers, which we'll be sharing the draft with them this week. We also would like to get some response and input from some of our water supply stakeholders. And so we are proposing on December 7th to have a gathering of the sub-regional water supply work groups, a virtual version of what we did back in 2017, share some background information with them, including some information about the recommendations in this report, not the report itself, and give them an opportunity to share some of their priorities and their local perspectives. That document would then be finalized, and we would be asking MOSSAC to approve it, which means we would ask you to share it with your organizations, whoever in your organization would need to have input on it. So that's going to be an ask of you as committee members. January 18th, hopefully approved and then shared. Next slide. So we talked about this at our last meeting, and we got some input from you that shaped the content. So currently the outline would be, an executive summary with some focused information. We included, since our comments at the last meeting, a section on how to use this report to take action, still including some high-level background information, and then tackling what the goals and recommendations would be. So information about some of the regional challenges, clarifying some of the principles, what's important in how we do our work, some of the equity and sustainability topics would fall there, and then specific goals and recommendations. And so we've had input in these 4 priority topic areas. And what we're seeing is that there's some actions that are being recommended that fall into things that we need to do to improve collaboration, information sharing, building capacity so that we have the staff that we need and they have the knowledge that they need. There are some data gaps. So we need to do some research focusing on a system assessment through the wide range of water supply, from the landscape that is our source water areas down through infrastructure? Do we know as much as we need to about sort of the state of infrastructure across the region? Where do we have monitoring networks? Where do we have gaps? There's been recommendations in all of our meetings that relate to needs to know more about how effective different best management practices are, different risk mitigation opportunities, priorities, costs. And then there's support for local plan and implementation that we've heard recommended as well. So that's the kind of content that we've been compiling based on what we've been hearing at these meetings. Also wanting to have some highlights about some local perspectives or local stories, challenges or success stories. So if you have an example in your part of the world that you think is important for people to highlight, either the challenge or a solution, please share those. And then supporting information, so maps, graphs that help provide some of the technical foundation is kind of where the report has settled as of now. Next slide. So as we continue to work on this, I would love to get any feedback you have now or after this meeting about what you see as critical content, a recommendation, a piece of information that your organization would need to see in order to approve this plan, this document. If you have suggestions for a map or a graph or another piece of information that legislators or your council members should consider, like, you know, you want this to be in their minds as they think about things that could impact water supply, let me know and we can include that. Also, as I said before, local stories or anything else. And so I would open that up for suggestions or questions.
Lana, this is Phil Klein.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I do like about this is the local stories, and we highlight the positive things that have happened, like the projects that have been carried out throughout the metro area by different communities that have shown some real results in water conservation and reduction of water usage, and some of the methods that they've used to accomplish that. And I think those are the things that legislators are looking for to help verify that if they're going to invest money, it's going to go for a good purpose.
And we do have some good examples of that. Thank you.
I see no hands.
Thank you, Tessa. Ponder it. You know where my email is. I'm the only Lanya Ross in the state of Minnesota. That covers the critical information I wanted to ask of you and share with you today. So unless there's anything anyone would like to add, I will turn this back to Chair Klein.
All right, thank you, Lanya. Basically, then I guess we're looking for is Sam or Ollie. Do you have a legislative update for us?
I can jump in. Thanks, Bill. No legislative update today.
You haven't decided how to spend the money yet?
Hoping that there is money. Yeah, front end of the process.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Thank you, Sam. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, with that, before we end, I want to be sure that everyone had a chance to share the reflections on the topics of the infrastructure and the mural activity. If you have any suggestions or ideas or comments, please, by all means, voice your concerns and anything else that the group should be aware of. We definitely would like to hear what you had to say. I can go down the list of individuals that were on the committee, or excuse me, on our meeting today, and I'll just briefly go through and ask if you have any additional comments that you would like to make? And if I may, I'll go through those. Annika, do you have any comments or anything that you'd like to add to the meeting today?
Nothing to add. Thank you.
Yep. Jeff Berg, you still with us?
He did leave at 2 p.m.
Okay. How about Sandeep Berman? Sandeep?
Was not in attendance.
Yeah. Mark Danilin, excuse me, Mark Danilin. I don't think Mark's with us either. John Gleason.
Nothing to add, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Valerie.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Mike Hong.
He did leave at 2:30.
Okay. And myself, I have none. Brad Larson.
He left at 2.
I see. I think Susan Morris. I think she may have left as well. Susan. Catherine.
I don't have anything to add, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Michael Robinson. I don't know if he's with us or not. Patrick Shea. I don't think he's with us. Jamie, I know you're here.
Nothing further.
All right, thank you. Lisa Bulbrick? Nothing?
She was not in attendance.
All right. And these others may not be either. Kevin Watson?
He did leave due to technical difficulties.
Okay, and I know Tanya's with us.
Yep, I am, and I do not have anything else to add. Thank
Okay,
you.
Very well. Well, very well. Thank you. I really appreciate it, everyone. The last, I guess that's it. That's the end of our meeting. If you have any additional questions or comments that you'd like to make, anything that we can add, that you can add to the meeting today, please by all means reach out to Lanya, and it'd be helpful to get this moving forward. This is really a great opportunity for us to add some real comments to the Minnesota legislature and the Met Council. This is some high-level stuff, and as a state of Minnesota, we are a leader in water conservation efforts. Surprisingly, kind of hard to believe, but we are. And your efforts are making this possible. So thank you for everything that you guys are doing, and thank you for attending our meeting today. And with that, I will close our meeting for today. Thank you.
And thank you for stepping in. Much appreciated.
No problem. You guys have a nice
Thanks, everyone.
weekend. Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.